Hello, welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight for a special episode with a returning guest, Jim Simpson, author of the book Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America. I think this book is important, and we weren't able to adequately cover it in the first show and had some technical issues in our attempt earlier this week, so we're back tonight. He will be our only guest tonight, and this show is dedicated to giving you a better overview of the topics in the book and how the left is using all of them to destroy our country. Jim will join us in just a few minutes, but first, it's time for the Informer Report. As you know by now, Matt Van Epps was the winner of the GOP primary in the 7th District race, and he will face Afton Ben, a far-left Democrat, in the general election on December 2nd. On the Republican side during the primary, there was a lot of out-of-state money opposing Jody Barrett, believed by many, including me, to be the best choice for our district, and a lot of out-of-state money that went to support Van Epps. Something really needs to be done about out-of-state money in our elections, but the people will have to demand it. It has to be made a campaign issue. Trump also endorsed Van Epps, likely due to his support of vouchers, which Barrett opposed. As a reminder, we now know those vouchers are not only turning out to be subsidies for those already in private schools, but are funding Islamic schools as well. This was a primary election, and Trump should have stayed out of it. Let's not forget his earlier endorsement of Bill Lee in 2022, which scared off any challengers, and later even Trump criticized Lee. So he helped stick us with Lee in his second term. There's the other endorsements of swamp creatures such as Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham. In short, Trump's endorsements are generally terrible for conservatives and often even for his own agenda. To make matters worse, some of his supporters are too lazy or stupid to do their own research and just gladly follow his lead. There's little doubt that the Trump endorsement gave Van Epps the win, but there's no doubt that there were a lot who voted him out of loyalty to Trump. The term magtard comes to mind. In any event, conservative voters only have one option to guarantee that far left loon that is, Afton Ben does not win this seat, and that is to vote for Epps. That's the only way to do it. For many of us, that is as nauseating as voting for Romney in 2012 or McCain in 2008. Might want to take a barf bag with you on Election Day. And that wraps up the installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at teeninformer.tv@gmail.com. And now to our guest, Jim Simpson, who was also with us last week. He's going to focus on how the communists in our country promoted and used illegal immigration to advance the goal of destroying our country. He's also going to cover other topics as well that we didn't have time to get to that are in the book. Like I say, this is a great book, got a lot of information. Hey, thank you for being with us. How are you doing today?
Hey, great to be with you, Dave. How's it going?
Going well, going well. We do have some slides to go with some of the topics tonight, but let's just get started and we'll let you kick it off.
Okay. Well, there's so much about immigration that, as I discuss in my book, none of this stuff came up in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, people are seeing it right now, and it's right in front of our eyes, that they've come out of the closet and shown their faces. But all of these agendas were in the works 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would like to go to one section of the book where it talks about that. And the Comintern, the Communist International, published in 1932 as a publication called Impricore, said in its effort, they had been trying to infiltrate communists into the United States illegally for a long time. And so they decided to make this a political issue. And here was what they advocated. And listen to this: complete right of asylum for all immigrants who have been compelled to leave their own country for political or economic reasons, that they should not be expelled or extradited. They shall be allowed to enter all countries without documents or visas. They shall be given identification papers valid in all countries, unrestricted right to stay in any country, full right to work and relief in cases of unemployment, immediate cancellation of all expulsion and extradition orders, the release of all arrested immigrants, and finally, the right to take part in the political and trade union life in the country in which they have found asylum. Now, I want to ask you, or your listeners, your viewers, what word in that paragraph does not describe the Democratic Party platform for illegal aliens?
Absolutely. This is what we're living today. Well, what we were living before Trump got back in office is absolutely what we're living, and that's been what they've been working on for a long time.
And that's absolutely right. And it doesn't stop there. Um, a California communist named Bert Corona was essentially the author in 1965 of Teddy Kennedy's Immigration Act, which changed the entire complexion of our immigration system from one where we were looking for people who came here to work, wanted to work, and mostly came from countries that shared our history and our culture,
Yep.
mostly, European countries. He opened it up to the entire world and reduced all the standards that were formerly necessary to become a U.S. citizen. And he said, well, don't worry, that won't really affect anything. And it's affected things dramatically. And that 65 law was written by Bert Corona and a couple of his communist colleagues on behalf of Teddy Kennedy. And Bert Corona and his communists had supported both Lyndon Johnson for president, Robert Kennedy for president, and even JFK. They supported them. And that's how, and Teddy, when they held a fundraiser for JFK, Teddy was their keynote speaker. And so,
was this known at the
this
time?
stuff has been been going on for a long time.
At 65 when this happened, or even prior to that, when they were involved with these people, did the opposition know that they had communists writing these laws? Did they know about this?
Well, that's a really good question. I make the point that from the mid 30s until Newt Gingrich's revolution took over Congress in 1994, the Democrats had virtually unbroken control of both houses of Congress, to the point where when Newt Gingrich took over, really only Democratic staffers knew anything about the programs they were overseeing. All the committee staff were primarily Democrats. And so he had to keep them on. And of course, it's, like the fox guarding the hen house. So that's a good question. And I don't honestly know the answer to it. I do know this, however, that I wrote an article in 2005. Let's see, was it 2005? No, July 19th, 2013. You remember the Gang of Eight immigration plan?
Yep.
That included our current Secretary of State and a bunch of other Republicans and Democrats together. I wrote something for World Net Daily called the GOP Immigration Plan devised by the Communist Party. And it traces back to Bert Corona and his California communists writing that first immigration bill and providing the groundwork for this second immigration bill. So either the Republicans who supported that were really ignorant, which is what I tend to believe, or they were complicit,
Yeah.
or they didn't care.
Yeah.
But I tend to believe that they just don't look that deeply into things because it's not politically correct to do so. It's very politically uncomfortable to use the C word,
Well, if
at
you're
least it
worried
was.
about that, then you're in cahoots. Whether you're, I mean, if that's
Whether you
if
mean
that's
to
why
be
you
or
don't
not.
bother to find out, then you're still tacitly in cahoots as far as I see it.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Or you're willfully ignorant. Yeah, that's right.
I think we've had a lot of that.
So go ahead. What were you going to say, Dave?
I think we've had a lot of that on the part of the Republicans. There's a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
willful
Oh,
ignorance.
oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, even now, it's pathetic. And I really just hope the Republican Congress can get its act together enough for the 26 elections so that Trump doesn't have to face off against a Democratic Congress again, because then the only way he's going to get anything done is through executive orders. And they're going to be battling him every step of the way
Yeah.
and making life impossible, making budgetary decisions impossible. But I don't know what gets into the minds of these Republicans.
Well, on that, he's already done a lot of executive orders, and the Republican
Tons, yeah,
Congress hasn't done much to codify any of them. I'm not sure what's been
right.
codified, but I don't think there's been much codified.
Well, he put a lot of stuff in the big, beautiful bill. I mean, he essentially repealed Obamacare. That was a big deal. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
And all the Democrats are complaining that people are going to lose their insurance. Do you remember that? There was a guy named, what was his name? I can't think of it, but he essentially said after Obamacare passed that it was we engaged in strategic dishonesty. We deliberately lied because we knew that if the American people knew what was really in Obamacare, they never would have allowed us to pass it. And he said this publicly, and it was reported, widely reported. Jonathan Gruber, that was the
Yeah.
guy's name.
Yeah.
And it's simply incredible. And so, of course, no, getting rid of Obamacare is not going to increase your premiums. No, it is not going to make you lose your insurance or lose your doctors. For a change, you'll be able to get all that stuff back because that's what Obamacare did. I remember when we had the exchange here in Maryland. I decided, well, I'm getting old. I might as well look into getting some kind of health insurance. Guess what my premium would be?
I imagine it's
Five thousand
outrageous.
dollars a year.
Good
Five
Lord. Good
thousand
Lord.
dollars a year.
Do you have anything else you want to hit on the immigration aspect? I know there's quite a bit to that.
Well, there's that. It's a huge. It's a very extensive. Uh, uh,
Or whatever topic you want to hit next out of the book. I mean, it doesn't have to be immigration, but
yeah. Well, let's see. Uh, there's so much. Take your pick.
what about the
Can we
replacement
talk
theory?
about?
Is the replacement theory covered in there? Was replacement theory actually part of the purpose of the immigration? I would think it would be.
Well, yes, and in fact, I have that slide is up right now, as you see. Um, I wrote about that in the Red Green Axis books, and the United Nations was founded by a Soviet agent.
Really?
Alger Hiss was the author of the UN Charter. And it was him and about 16 other communists and members of the Council of Foreign Relations, same thing. Many veterans of the League of Nations who wrote that, sat down in San Francisco and wrote the UN Charter. And Alger Hiss went with FDR to the Yalta conference with Stalin and Churchill to decide how they were going to divide up Europe. And he whispered in FDR's ear to give Eastern Europe to the Soviets. And so when that was all done, he flew to the Soviet Union and was given an award for all the work he had done.
And
And
so nothing happened to him?
nothing happened to him. Nothing happened to him. I mean, Whittaker Chambers eventually exposed him and his network, and Elizabeth Bentley, the same thing. Uh, Former communists who changed sides and came out and told on them all. Uh, the worst thing he got was a charge for perjury. That was the only thing he was ever charged with. And
Wow.
you could say, even then, the 40s and the 50s, you could say that, the FDR administration was absolutely saturated with communists. And one of the ones that nobody ever talks about is Harry Dexter White. And Harry Dexter White was the one who actually penned the letter to the Japanese that basically gave them little choice but to attack Pearl Harbor. And
In what
his
way?
purpose,
And how did that?
well, because they desperately needed oil for their war machine, right?
Right.
They didn't have any, and uh, through his letter, he made it clear that we were going to make it virtually impossible for them to get the oil that they needed to continue. And so it was a kind of thing where they felt pushed against the wall. And the important thing is the reason he did it. Um, Stalin was facing the Germans
Right.
on the Western Front, and he was facing the Japanese coming up through Manchuria on the Eastern Front.
Right.
And what better way to get the Japanese off his back than to suck America into the war? And that was his goal for doing that. So he did that, and he also uh, held back the hundreds of millions of dollars that Congress had appropriated to the nationalist Chinese, which they desperately needed to buy more weapons and ammunition and military equipment in their fight with the communists. And he held it back long enough for Mao Zedong to win. He worked in the Department of Treasury under the secretary. And then, for all his efforts, Harry Truman, the buck stops here, Harry,
Yeah.
instead of arresting him and sending him to jail for the rest of his life or hanging him from a tree, which is what should have happened, he sent him off to found the World Bank, which he did. And then he was its first president. And of course, the World Bank has its entire time used mostly US taxpayer dollars to prop up dictatorships all over the world. And then when he was done with that, he was sent to Bretton Woods to found the International Monetary Fund.
Harry
That
Dexter.
was
Harry Dexter White. Okay. Yeah.
Harry Dexter White. I mean, the things that he did were amazing, and the things that he got away with were amazing. And the Democrats didn't blink. They knew what was going on.
So
And
we
even
basically
when,
gave over, and I've heard this before, that if you think about it, we spent all that time in World War II, lost all those people, just to hand over half of Europe to the Soviets.
to the Soviets,
And for the next 50 years, we have a Cold War.
I'm a
And
big
so,
Patton fan. Patton said,
yeah,
we should have, once we got to Berlin, we should have just kept going east
yeah,
and
absolutely, absolutely. What
just
about the
wipe them off the
NGOs?
map.
What about the NGO roles in illegal immigration?
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, you know, the title of my book is Manufactured Crisis, right?
Right,
And a big inspiration, not the original, because the crisis strategy has been around almost as long as Communist Party has been around.
Right.
Um, the idea is to create crises, and then when the crisis becomes intolerable, create solutions that will create even bigger crises.
Yep.
And the first group that really codified that in very specific ways was, as you know, Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven,
Yep.
who were both Columbia University sociology professors and radical leftists from the beginning. And yeah, that's a picture of the two. This was at the signing of the motor voter law, the National Voter Registration Act, which they spent 10 years developing and then writing the legislation, which President Clinton signed in 1993, which gave us the absolute chaos that we have as an electoral system right now. And a lot of that is written right into the National Voter Registration Act. And I go to great extent describing the sections of the law in the chapter that all cheaters might vote. Um,
That's a pretty
but
accurate
I
description.
also, well, it is. And they were also the inspiration for creation of the Office of Economic Opportunity in 1965 or 66. It was another part of Johnson's Great Society, which, of course, was inspired by Richard Cloward, as I think I mentioned on the last show.
Yep.
Um, but they created the OEO, and by 1973, they had 10,000 NGOs, 10,000 tax exempt organizations getting money from the federal government to essentially push the radical left's agenda, paid for by taxpayer dollars. Now, not all NGOs, not all these tax exempt organizations, most of them are not receive 100% government funding. Some receive some federal, some state, some local, some receive only private funding, but they are all 501c3 IRS code tax exempt charities that are supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to be apolitical. But as you and I know,
Yeah.
they're not. And so in 1973, there were 10,000, plus there were a bunch of huge foundations like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Fund. Um,
Now they bring in those
Party.
organizations bring in illegals as well, right? Or they help
Well,
assist?
the Ford Foundation was essentially the financier of the open borders agenda. I mean, that was starting
Wow.
back in the 50s. Yeah, no, they threw, once the lefts penetrated and took over the board of the Ford Foundation, they threw Edsel Ford out. And he left the room screaming at them, this is not what we wanted. This is not what we created this foundation for. And they said, good luck. So what? We've got control now. Tough luck. Leave. And they took over and used, which is, last time I checked, a foundation had $12 billion in assets. And so, there are many foundations, and people knew in the 50s that their foundations were very dangerous. There was a book written called Foundations of Betrayal. And there was a brave congressman who held hearings on these foundations. And he was canceled, he was smeared, he was ridiculed. And
he was right.
Yeah, and he was absolutely right.
You're talking McCarthy, right?
No, this was not McCarthy. This was another guy.
Oh.
McCarthy was also right. McCarthy was absolutely right. And he wasn't the only one. There were a lot of people raising concerns about infiltration of communists into the military. And of course, that's where the Rosenbergs were found. They were at a military installation in New Jersey. And McCarthy had very much focused on that particular installation precisely because they had found the Rosenbergs there, and there were other communists there, and virtually everyone he named was a
Let
communist.
me ask you about Marshall, General Marshall, because I think he's
Oh
the
yeah.
one that basically uh, took McCarthy to task, and then of course everybody just piled on. Was Marshall? Was he a lefty, or was he just naive?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I've heard that he was possibly a communist. Um, I think Vinegar Joe Stilwell, who was the leader of the army in China around the time that Mao was taking. I don't have my times correct, so don't quote me on all this because I have not studied that particular part of history very deeply. Some say that Marshall was a communist, some say he was just naive. He didn't like the Marshall Plan. He was against the Marshall Plan. The
But it,
Marshall Plan was a brilliant idea, you know, to
wait
help
a minute, Marshall
rebuild.
didn't like the Marshall Plan.
No, Marshall didn't like the Marshall Plan.
I thought
It
he
was named
created it.
after him, but that
The Marshall Plan.
I mean, it was one of the wisest things we did in World War II. After World War II, was to help rebuild Europe so they could get back on their feet again. Because of course, World War One,
Right.
the French took over, and they were nothing but vindictive, and basically pushed Germany into World War II almost, you know. And so but so I honestly don't know about Marshall. I do know that just there's so many questions. I finished reading a book recently about George Patton, and he was murdered. And the implication of the book, it was written by Bill O'Reilly. I don't generally follow Bill O'Reilly, but he wrote a very good book there. And his conclusion was that he was murdered and that there were a lot of very powerful American figures that wanted him dead.
Yeah.
It was not merely the Soviets. I think the Soviets did it, but I think that they had Americans who either turned their heads the other way or could have even been in, implicated
Yeah, I've
in,
heard
in
that. I didn't
yeah,
know if there was any truth to it or not, but the more I find out, the more I dig. It would not shock me because he was right about the Soviets, and I
he
think they
was.
were afraid. I think the administration may have been afraid that he would instigate something. Uh,
Yeah,
you know,
right, right.
so
Yeah. Well, Eisenhower didn't like him. He didn't like Eisenhower. He thought Eisenhower was kind of weak, which I think really Eisenhower was. He was a compromiser.
right.
He could get a bunch of different people in the room and get them to agree. He's a very good politician, but I don't think he was a very good military commander. I agreed with Churchill that we should have invaded Europe through the soft underbelly of Eastern Europe and cut off the Soviets, and then went west to go after the Nazis. That was probably would have been a much less costly campaign, and
Would have left us
would
in a
have
better
saved
position when it was
Eastern
all
Europe.
said and done. Anything
Yeah,
else you
well,
want to hit on immigration before we move to some other topic in the book?
it was something else. You had mentioned something, and now I just can't remember what it was that I wanted to say in response. Um,
We talked about the
oh, yes,
replacement. Yeah.
yes, 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 about the nonprofits. Okay, so there were 10,000 created by the OEO. In 1991, there were 150,000, or there were 500,000
Good.
tax exempt organizations. And today, there are over 1.5 million tax exempt organizations, and almost all of them, with the possible exception of like the Heritage Foundation and the David Horowitz Freedom Center and a few others. You could probably name them on two hands, count them on two, maybe even one hand. The rest are all lefty, and they get some of their money. A lot of the immigration groups get state and local government money as well as federal government money. I did a very extensive article about that for the Epic Times a few years back, where I list actually, many of the 100 odd tax exempt groups, and some of them even run by illegal aliens. Okay, they're run by illegal aliens who are making $200,000 a year heading these illegal alien assistance organizations,
Can
and
you
they
give us
were
can you give us a few names? Can you remember any names right off the top of your head?
well. The most important NGOs that have aided and abetted illegal aliens are what they're called voluntary agencies, VOLAGs, and they have been appointed by the State Department to resettle refugees
Office of
and
Refugee Replacement
and the
or
Office
Resettlement?
of
Refugee
Refugee
Resettlement.
Resettlement
Yes,
and
yes.
Health and Human Services that deals with illegal aliens.
And didn't
And
Kennedy
so,
have a hand in that law as well? The refugee law that was passed in 1980. Didn't he have a hand in that?
oh, I'm sure. Oh, yes, yes, he did. It was actually, it was signed by Carter, but yes, he did. He definitely did, and it entirely flipped the whole emphasis of refugee resettlement from people who were fleeing communist countries to communists who were fleeing, non-communist countries because they were going to get killed otherwise, and um, so. Uh, and I don't remember if I mentioned this the last time, but for example, before the Refugee Act was passed, Governor Jerry Brown of California tried to prevent a plane load of Vietnamese refugees from landing in California because he knew that these people coming from communist takeover in Vietnam were
Right.
certainly not going to be voting Democrat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he didn't want to have to deal with it, and they landed anyway. And.
Well, there's a big
But
contingent of Chinese
but
in California, and there's a big contingent. There's a large communist group in California among the Chinese, and I cannot remember the name of it. Are you familiar with them?
that's a better question to ask Trevor Loudon. He knows
Okay.
those.
Okay.
He knows those groups in and out. But yeah, I know that the communist Chinese practically run California as it stands right now, and but of the Volags, the Catholic charities, they're almost uncountable. They're all over the country, and that was the only group that I could not get a full estimate of how much money they get from the federal government to resettle illegal aliens. But Catholic Charities knows where those missing kids are. And the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops was another one. They got billions of dollars. The Lutheran Immigrant Aid
Yep.
Society got hundreds of millions of dollars. The Bethany
Yep.
Baptist Services,
We've got
they
one of
get
those in
hundreds of
Tennessee.
millions of dollars. Yeah, and
All those
there's
organizations you mentioned are in Tennessee. Every
yeah,
one of them.
and there's many small ones that that are completely off the radar. Like I did an article a few years, back in 2014 when that whole issue started heating up. There was a small um, place here in Maryland that was supposed to be a shelter for disturbed children, and they got $2.5 million from the state government
Wow.
to house 50 or 100 illegal aliens. And I actually went to that place and I walked in. I wasn't supposed to. I was basically, you know, thrown out, but not before I walked around and took pictures of the, Central American illegal aliens walking around outside, and and wrote it all up. But there's so many like that, and everybody gets into the act because the money just goes out the door for all these groups, and Uh,
One of the
yeah,
goals is replacement, though, right? Isn't part of the goal of bringing all these people over here to
that was your
replace
original
us?
question.
Yeah.
That was your original question. And here's the thing. So the UN, this is where we started. The UN was written by communists, right?
Right.
And it was written to serve the Soviet Union's purposes. It was not written to, bring the world together and help create world peace. In fact, the Soviet definition of world peace, and that's where we have to be careful when the Democrats talk about, their Trump is endangering democracy. And Soviet definition of world of peace is peace will be in the world after all our enemies have been killed.
That's the same thing Islam believes. That's
Yeah,
almost exactly the same thing that
yeah,
Islam believes.
yeah, yeah. No, oh no, they're very alike.
Yeah.
They're very both totalitarian ideologies that brook no compromise with anybody else. Um, and when the Democrats say we're threatening their democracy, well, what they're talking about is their uh, people's republic
Right,
democracy.
right, right.
Yeah,
Because we're actually a republic. We're not a democracy. The founders were
yeah,
smart enough not to make us a democracy.
right, right. But so the UN has been telling us for decades, you know, oh, the population explosion, the population bomb. They still have Paul Ehrlich, who wrote the population bomb, come and talk and give him big fees, even though he wrote the book and he was wrong in the 70s about it.
Yeah.
He wrote a revision. He was wrong in the 80s. He was wrong in the 90s, and he's been wrong ever since. But they still oh, the population. We have to worry about population explosion. So of course we in the West, being the good little obedient, uh, foolish white people we are, or people generally, we say, oh, okay, we'll reduce our reproduction rate to basically
Well, below
not even
replacement. We're
replacement
below
rates.
replacement.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the UN comes out with this new thing, says, "Oh, you stupid people in the West, you don't have enough people to do the work that's needed to be done. So we need to create a program called replacement migration, where immigrants replace the people who would otherwise be working, but because there's not enough of us to fulfill all the jobs that are out there." Now, if you show that slide again, is something very interesting about it, because when they first came out with it, they came out with replacement migration is the solution to a declining and aging population.
What time frame was that
Is
when they put that out? Do you know?
That was around when I wrote my first Red Green Axis book, which was around 2015.
Okay.
They still had it. It is a solution. After my Red Green Axis books came out, they decided, whoops, maybe we better change that to is it a solution? So they're not taking credit for it, because at that point they were taking credit for the whole idea of replacement migration. And now they're just posing it as a question that other people have to answer. But they advocated it.
Right.
They advocated, and I really think they changed their tune just slightly in response to my book and others like mine, where we talk about that and expose their agenda.
Yeah.
And of course, we're all called conspiracy theories, because after all, nobody ever said anything about replacement migration. I said, oh, well, okay, just go look up at the UN. It's right there before your eyes,
And you talked about it a minute ago, hey, the whole population bomb. And so Native Americans are having fewer kids. It's even worse in Europe. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine, I'm sure it's not connected, but all the countries being overrun in Europe, in America here, I mean, especially in Europe, they're being overrun primarily by
Muslims.
Islamic migrants who go over there and they're going to have umpteen kids. And
Yep.
the average European, they have 1.2. I'm not quite sure what that 0.2 looks like, but it's below replacement theory. And
Right.
they have all these people they're taking on. They are being replaced in their own country, and their
They
culture's
are.
being replaced.
Yep.
And I mean, it's like the Islamists have taken over Europe without firing a shot.
No, that's right. That's absolutely right. Most major British cities have Muslim mayors.
Yep.
I mean, it's and they do whatever they want. They do whatever they want. The worst example is, the grooming and mass rape of
Yep.
underage British girls.
Yeah. And that's not
It,
new.
it,
That's been going on for years.
it's been going on for years, and the government will do nothing about it. And that's because, as Katie Hopkins said in a recent interview with Lara Logan, these people have been stealthy and they've been at it, creating the infrastructure for decades that would turn against the British people,
Yep.
because the people in place in power in Britain now are not British loving people. These are communists. These are traitors of the worst kind, and it's they're really deeply entrenched, and they are also deeply entrenched in this country.
Yep. In the
And
universities.
almost the entire Democratic Party
Yep.
is in that position.
The whole Hamas Free Palestine movement within our country. That is
Yes.
ate up with the communists and ate up with people, well, obviously the Islamists. People, it seems to be forgotten what Hamas is all about. But I would encourage people out there, go look up the Hamas charter. Read what their charter is. It's all about Islam, and it's all about Islam ruling everybody else. So keep that in mind. Most of the people,
Yeah.
for instance, in Gaza are pro-Hamas. The
Yeah.
vast
Yeah,
majority
that's
of them are
right.
pro-Hamas. And
Yeah, that's right. And even to the extent of allowing and even encouraging their own children to become suicide bombers. I
absolutely.
mean, it's truly sick. And I was listening to I was watching an interview that Dinesh D'Souza did with I can't remember his name, but he was the son of the founder of Hamas, or
Yes.
one of the
Yep.
founders
Yep.
of Hamas, and he has turned, a corner, and he left that he was going to be a suicide bomber or at least a terrorist,
Right.
and he left that entirely, and he talks about it. And I wrote an article in 2005 called "Who Was Yasser Arafat," where I explain very clearly there is no such, and he said the same thing in this interview. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There was never, ever a cultural group called the Palestinians, ever. They don't have any special language. They don't have any special culture.
Right.
They are just Arabs living in that area.
I would argue
That's
they do
it.
have a culture. Their culture is terrorism.
Well, it's become that way.
Yeah.
It's become that way. But one of the early founders of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was a communist group founded by the KGB, said he said this, and I'm quoting him: the Palestinian people do not exist, but we posit their existence to enable us to continue our war against the Zionists. That's what he said.
Wow.
That's what, and that's exactly what this other guy said in this interview with Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah. I know the
Exactly
interview
the
you're
same.
talking about. I can't remember the guy's name. If I could, I probably couldn't pronounce it. But I think
Yeah,
he
right.
was, like you said, he was the son of one of the leaders of Hamas, and I think he became a
Yep.
Christian. And so
Yes.
now he does talks about all this. So
He's
let's hit some
powerful.
other things from the book, some other ways they've infiltrated us, the other avenues of attack that they use, organizations and movements that we don't think are
You know what I
associated.
like?
Yep.
I like the evil eye.
Okay, let's talk about that.
The evil eye. One of the biggest and most dangerous, you know, we have what they call the seven deadly sins, right?
Right.
Pride, greed, anger, lust, envy, sloth, procrastination. Um, One of the most dangerous of these is envy.
Yeah.
Envy. Communism is the ideology of envy that justifies anything and everything for those envious people to get what they want.
Yep.
And,
And
you
it
know,
occurs regardless of, I mean, it's something that already existed, but communism just exploits that and makes a focus
well,
of it, right?
if you recall, uh, the late Dr. Jack Wheeler, who was a really brilliant guy, he was a Reaganite, really brilliant guy, and he died under really bizarre circumstances in Wilmington, Delaware. I think he was murdered. But anyway, he said, since the dawn of time, there's always been a malevolent undercurrent, a dark side of human nature that despises success. It is called envy. And throughout history, envious people have sought to undermine and subvert the best in us. Unwilling or unable to perform on an equal par, they seek instead to pull the world down to their level. That is the definition of a communist. The late Dr. Jack Wheeler called it the evil eye and described how primitive cultures are shot through with it. And that's why they've remained primitive. It says, for example, in the Amazon rainforest, one tribe uh, that retains its ancient hunting gathering lifestyle, uh, it's an accepted practice that when a woman gives birth, she tearfully proclaims her child to be ugly. She does this in order to ward off the envious black magic of the evil eye, the mal ojo, that would be directed at her baby by your fellow tribesmen if they knew how happy she was with her beautiful baby. Fundamental reason why certain cultures remain static and never evolve is the overwhelming extent to which the lives of people within them are dominated by envy and envy avoidance, as anthropologists call it, the envy barrier. And
Wow.
so that that is what we are faced with today. Another a sociologist called it a self-pitying inclination to contemplate another's superiority or advantages combined with a vague belief in his being the cause of one's own deprivation,
Right.
whereas the socialist believes uh, himself robbed by the employer, just as the politician in a developing country believes himself robbed by the industrial countries. So primitive man believes himself robbed by his neighbor, the latter having succeeded by black magic in spiriting away to his own fields part of the former's harvest. You know, this is the kind of thing that we're looking at here. This is the kind of people, this is the kind of mindset we have. And where does that mindset start? Why why do so many people have that mindset?
Well, I think there's always
And
been. I think it's almost natural, but people like communists and other groups, they take that natural inclination for envy, jealousy, whatever you want to call it, and they exploit it and they keep it going. They just fuel it. And everything is, oh well, you don't have this because they have
yeah,
all that. It's the,
they have all that.
yeah, that's
And it's so overtly wrong. Uh, you know, Apple didn't take any money from me when Steve Jobs became a billionaire. Apple made many people wealthy. All they did was add to the wealth of the world. And that's what most capitalists do. They add to the wealth unless they're, you know, some of the crony capitalists,
Right.
crony socialists, actually fascist, uh, run corporations. But yeah, they exploit that and they push it. Well, why are they able to do that with so many people? It's because so many people don't have God in their life.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah,
And
it's
plus, it
because
is a natural, I think it is a natural tendency. But if you
it's a
don't
natural
have
thing. Yeah.
anything to teach you otherwise, which,
Yes.
the Bible would do that, if you don't have
Yeah.
that, then yeah, it's going to be easy to exploit you, exploit that natural tendency.
Yeah. I mean, most of our morality comes directly from the Bible. Most of the things that we believe in right and wrong are we take right out of the Bible.
Yeah. And that's why
And
they had to attack the Bible and they had to attack the family.
yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yep. So that one, I thought, you know, that's just a little interesting aside, but I think it's so important to understand what motivates these people.
You've got a chapter
Uh,
in there on Molech and Baal, I think,
no,
or Molech.
well, not specifically. What I have is, where is it? Um,
There it goes. There we go.
yeah, no, I have a description of how um, the kids are being stolen from their parents. Let me just look up something. Okay, it wasn't that. Maybe it was Wyoming. Yeah, yeah. I have a really good example in DEI and the weaponization of culture. Yeah, that's where it comes from. Uh, I put in one example. Um,
Was that related to the last slide that we just had up?
yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, definitely. Um, uh, Dr. Wallace Wong, a psychologist representing the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, claimed that 3-year-old children knew their authentic self better than their parents. Okay,
Good.
here's a nut job.
Yeah.
Their underlying principles claim conversion therapies for children are harmful. Yet, Dr. Wong encouraged a Canadian girl he began counseling in 5th grade to begin testosterone treatment in 7th grade without her father's permission or knowledge. Her father, Robert Hoogland, became the target of an extended legal battle over his daughter when courts ordered him not to speak about the situation or attempt to detransition her. He spent 2 months of a 6-month sentence in jail for defying the courts.
Now, where was
But
this?
finally,
Where did this happen?
this was, I believe, hold on. Yeah, no, it doesn't say. Oh, this was in Canada.
Okay.
This was in Canada. But there's another example, uh, a Montana case of Jennifer Kolstad, who at 14 was removed from her home by Child Protective Services because her parents refused to let her transition. And GOP Governor Greg Janfort agreed with the Child Protective Services despite a Montana law banning such surgeries. On January 19th, the couple lost custody of their daughter to the Protective Services, who said that allowing her to be transgender is in her therapeutic interest and that her parents are not following recommended therapy.
Good
But
Lord.
since Montana doesn't allow this, The Child Protective Services moved her to a Wyoming facility for a month where she was treated like a boy and addressed as Leo. Ultimately, she'll be moved to Canada to live with her biological mother, where presumably she'll get the chemicals and surgery unavailable in Montana. Her birth mother abandoned her when she was very young, and this woman was described by Jennifer and her sister as uncaring, abusive, and crazy. So, is this really in her best interest? You know, um,
But none of that is legal. And I mean, but it was allowed to happen, even though it's
it
obviously
was
illegal.
allowed to happen despite the fact it was illegal, and it was a GOP governor that allowed it.
Good Lord.
And the prior one where the guy Robert Hoogland finally got to speak out in 2023, but he hasn't seen his daughter since 2019.
Good
He
Lord.
says the trans ideology in the Canadian legal system destroys families, and it destroyed mine. It's just
That just should
incredible.
not be allowed. And I don't, I don't
No,
understand how come there's, to be honest with you, in those situations, not more parents. I, I don't know why there haven't been more people shot.
yeah,
I think a
yeah,
parent would be fully justified in shooting somebody if they do something like that.
yeah.
Absolutely do. I
Well,
mean, just to
you,
take a
you
kid
know,
like that, that's just wrong. Um,
well, I mean, what they teach kids in school, I mean, middle school and even elementary school kids are being exposed to child pornography.
right.
Why aren't the teachers and the administrators being arrested for peddling child porn
Yeah.
to underage kids? I
Well,
mean,
we had
it,
that discussion here in Tennessee. We had a couple laws passed in reference to that about obscene material.
yeah,
And I may have
I
said
think
this the
you
last
told me
time, and if
that.
I did, I apologize. But I have a
Yeah,
state senator. Then when I brought this up, he's like, "Oh, well, we can't do it because, we have to. No prosecutor is going to prosecute it because of the Miller test, which is a Supreme Court creation. It's nothing constitutional by any means, but you'd have to litigate it. You couldn't just, for whatever reason, these people who believe that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter, they believe that means that your state cannot set standards on obscenity or pornography and enforce them without going through the Miller hoops, which is insane.
yeah, it's absolutely
Can we put
insane.
that slide back up there a minute, Kevin? I want to hit that real quick. And this is, some of the things that they've done. They've promoted abortion as reproductive health care, explicit sex education, which you mentioned, and encouraging genital mutilation. Everybody can read the rest of them on there. It's encouraging white children to hate themselves.
Yeah,
It's pushing the
no,
whole global citizenship idea and terrorizing children into believing that they are worthless and useless. It's just, I mean, these are the kind of things they push on our kids.
yeah, and I think I have slides up there. But I guess I don't have that in the book. I thought I did. I have slides up there. Yeah, here we go. Uh, well, this is more about the breakdown of the black family.
Right.
I talk about in the war on Black America,
Yep.
the idea was to split up the black nuclear family, which was really their source of strength. And blacks were making great strides, ironically, before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed,
Yep.
and then the Great Society, which basically pushed people onto welfare. And when you're on welfare, they had a law. It was called or not a law, but they had a rule called a father in the house, and they would literally go around black neighborhoods at 10 o'clock at night and drag men who were there with their wives or their significant other and their kids. They would literally drag them out and put them on a bus to get out of
Yeah.
that area because if you're collecting welfare, you're supposed to be a single mother,
Right. Right.
and
There's a
but
There's a guy named Chad Parker. He's a black guy, lives in Dallas. He owns a plumbing business, but he's apparently been into history pretty much his whole life. And he's got I've seen, like I say, I've seen this advertised on Facebook. He's got a documentary coming out that explains how Martin Luther King was a total phony. Didn't even
Yeah.
believe in Christianity. All the people surrounding him, or the vast majority of them surrounding him, were
Yeah,
communist.
yeah.
But he lays it out. Now, I mean, that's, hats off to the guy, because he's going to catch hell from a lot of the people in the black community, because we have, deified Martin Luther King. And
Well, I mean,
this just, he lays it out. It's cut and dried. And so I'm interested in watching that. I've seen him talk a lot about it, but I haven't actually seen the series. But in advertising it, he's brought up a lot of clips, and he's identified a lot of the players in there. And I don't think there's any doubt that he was in fact a communist.
yeah, right. No, actually, I think I saw a short clip on that on Instagram, and it was very, well put together and very much to the point. But what I was going to say here was, in that chapter, there's a report titled, "What Can the Federal Government Do to Decrease Crime and Revitalize Communities?" And the Department of Justice put it out, found that in fatherless homes, there were 63% of all youth suicides, 90% of all homeless and runaway youths, 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders, 71% of all high school dropouts, 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions, 75% of adolescent patients in substance abuse centers.
Yep.
And Walter Williams, a black economist, correctly said, the welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery couldn't do, and that is to destroy the black family.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we address all these things? And there are more things. There's more chapters in the book. Like I say, I highly recommend the book. It outlines all the different avenues they're attacking us on. We've covered some of them here tonight. We covered some on the earlier show. But what can we do to push back on this?
Well, my last chapter is called "What Is to Be Done," and that was actually a tract that Vladimir Lenin wrote. I thought it would be a good title for the last chapter. But yes, problems do identify the solution. But I have 20 pages of solutions, 20 pages. And a lot of these things are things that you and I, average citizens, can do. And I say the first among them is pray, because I think we're going to need supernatural help to defeat this evil that has become so entrenched in our society. And I also think that President Trump is doing a lot of the right things. For example, when Pam Bondi and Kash Patel recently announced that they were going after the funders of Antifa and the networks of funding for Antifa, that is just music to my ears, because I have been advocating using RICO statutes to go after, like George Soros's Open Society Foundation and these other big foundations, which are being used to subvert and destroy our country. And they are continuing criminal enterprises. There's no other way to put it.
Right.
And you could confiscate all of their assets and throw their leaders in jail. And boy, getting rid of the money, the left has stolen so much money from us. Taking that away from them and then forcing many of them to face consequences is something that we should all be demanding, and not merely at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well.
They work at all levels. They've already, the left has a good handle in every state and a lot of local, especially any sizable city, you're going to have some leftists.
And that's the thing. we we tend to ignore state and local elections, and that's how we get these radical judges. I talk
Yeah.
in the book about critical theory, uh, which came out of the Frankfurt School, the communist school founded in Frankfurt, Germany, that transferred to Columbia Teachers College in the 1930s to escape the Nazis. And all of the teachers were communists,
Yeah.
and they created critical theory, which basically criticizes everything about our society and breaks it apart. And then from that downstream, you got critical race theory, you got critical legal theory, you got critical pedagogy, you got critical women's studies,
Yeah.
there's hundreds of them,
Just
and they
cut
all
and
break.
paste. I mean, they can apply,
Yeah,
they can make that work for anything. Make a grievance for every group.
every group.
Yeah.
Critical legal theory is now the primary type of stuff taught in law schools rather than constitutional law.
Right.
And that's one reason why we're getting so many of these extreme left judges and district attorneys
Yeah.
and lawyers who attack everything good about our country.
And I want to say something
And
on that.
yeah,
If the 14th Amendment has been perverted more than any other amendment. And it
yeah,
is pretty much what the court has done with the 14th, especially under the Due Process Clause and Equal Protection. They've taken something that was supposed to mean that, okay, the freed black slave now has the same rights as the white man. That's what it was intended to do. Well, it was never meant to be, it was never meant to allow the federal government to nationalize or federalize the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were still a restriction on the federal government. Even the courts after 14th Amendment understood that for almost 60 years. The first time they incorporated the First Amendment, the first one of the Bill of Rights, was 1925. And then they started in the 40s through the 60s. The last thing they incorporated against the states was the Second Amendment in 2010. But when you have the federal government taking something that was meant to be a restriction on them, and now you
right,
put it in their hands, and
right,
now there's one standard which is going to change according to court opinion. I mean, or they're going to look at precedent, but
yep,
we've got to get back to federalism. We have to
yeah,
reject a lot of what they've done over the last, well, like you say, 100 years. But there's a really good book about that, Government by Judiciary, by Raoul Berger, and he laid out how, I mean, he was a lib, but he laid out how the court deliberately perverted the 14th Amendment and applied the Bill of Rights through it. And now most of our cases are perverted 14th Amendment cases. Our Constitution is to a great degree been replaced with a
yeah.
perverted understanding and application of the 14th Amendment.
Well, and that's where, state and local government elections become so important
Yeah.
because we can change that. And the school boards, go to school board meetings, start speaking out. The one thing I will say about Charlie Kirk's death is that it has inspired a lot more people to become outspoken and become more brave. I mean, that example that he set
Yeah.
was really an inspiration.
Yeah. And
And
I hope that lasts. I hope that's not just flash in the pan.
yeah, me as well,
Yeah.
because that's what we need. And I there are friends here who go to school board meetings and they're very vocal and outspoken, and we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've won a lot of board of election elections. We've thrown a lot of those people out and replaced them with people who are going to create saner policies the for the schools.
Absolutely.
And we also have to do things like identify, for example, the Modern English Language Association is the one that recommends books
Right.
to
That's it.
almost all public schools throughout the country. And they are radical leftists. And so get rid of the Modern Language Institute, replace it with something else. there's a lot of things that we can do. We have to learn. That's a big part of the reason I wrote that book, because there's so much to know about the agenda that they're up to. But then there are answers for practically all of that in the last chapter. And we can all get involved, and we don't even have to get involved in a way that pushes us too far out of our comfort zone. But we have to recognize the fact that we have precious little time to save our country. And if we don't save it, we are in for something that so horrific, you can't imagine it.
Absolutely.
Nobody can imagine it.
Yeah.
And it won't only be horrific for the United States, it will be horrific for the world, because the world economy relies on the United States. And if our economy collapses, which it would immediately with a communist takeover,
yeah,
the whole world economy would collapse, and it would make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park.
Absolutely. Your website is crisisnow.net, and they can get your book on the website or on Amazon. You also have a children's book that's out now.
Yeah.
And they can get that there as well, and talk about that real quick. The Christmas, what is that? The Christmas? I can't remember.
Yeah, the day Christmas didn't come. It's a story about a little girl who wakes up Christmas morning. She goes downstairs to peek at all the presents and all the, the tree with all the lights on and everything, like we used to do as kids. And it's not there. There's no presents, there's no tree, there's no nothing. And she runs up alarmed and asks her parents where it all went. And they don't even know what she's talking about. And she goes to school, and her teacher doesn't know what she's talking about. Nobody knows what she's talking about. They've all forgotten that Christmas ever existed. And so she goes out to swing on her tree, in the old oak tree in the woods behind her house, and the tree talks to her. And the tree tells her that she's the only one who knows that Christmas exists, and if she wants to save it, she's going to have to go to a magical place where Christmas is made, called the Inner Kingdom, and seek out the white reindeer, because the white reindeer may be able to save Christmas. And
kind of like Rudolph, huh?
Pardon me?
Kind of like Rudolph, huh?
Well, it's a kind of like a cross between the Lord of the Rings and the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, because it's a fantasy where she goes into this other world, and there's all kinds of evil creatures and things trying to stop her, and she's accompanied by Dewey Diggins the mole, Bruin the bear, and Jitters the squirrel, and the four of them go through all these various adventures and misadventures to seek out the white reindeer for his counsel. And it's a really good children's book, and we're in the process of trying to make it into a movie, a full-length movie, which I'm telling you, it will be the kind of traditional Christmas movie that everybody in the family will sit down to enjoy, over and over again, kind of like The Wizard of Oz, like we used to when we were kids with that.
Yeah.
And shows like that, because it's a great story to read to your kids or to your grandkids. Great story to give as a gift to others that have kids, and it's a great story to read. I have a lot of friends, they're adults. One of my friends who read it, it's fantastic. Couldn't put it down. Made me feel like a kid again.
Well, good. We need some of that. We do need some good things. Hey, thank you for being with us. Thank you for all the work you've done. I mean, the book you've got out's great. You've got a lot of other great books. I definitely recommend people go to your website, and I definitely recommend the book Manufactured Crisis, and it's got a lot of good information. Well, once again, thanks for being with us, and we'll have you back sometime in the future. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Thanks again to Jonathan and Mary for their financial support from July through October. Man, you guys have been great, and we really, really appreciate it. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tuniformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. A few announcements here. The Stewart County Sons of Confederate Veterans will host Gene Andrews on October 14th, 7 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center for a discussion on Nathan Bedford Forrest and the true story of the so-called Fort Pillow Massacre. Was not a massacre, and you've been fed a line. The Henry County GOP will host a meet and greet for Monty Fritz, who is running for governor in 2026 on October 23rd at 6 p.m. at Tom's Pizza, 2501 East Wood Street. Please arrive early if you intend to eat. The Stewart County GOP will host a meet and greet for Monty Fritz October 30th, 6:30 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center. If you haven't heard Monty speak, you need to. Next Monday, October 13th, Tennessee Firearms Association Director and Attorney John Harris will talk to us primarily about the amount of power possessed by your local DA for ill or for good. And of course, we'll hit some on the AG and the legislature's actions against the right to keep and bear arms. And for our second show next week, the Regional Director of the John Birch Society, Arthur Hampton, will join us to explain who John Birch was and what they believe. You need to hear this. There's a lot of misinformation out about the group and what they support, but they are an excellent group. They have a lot of institutional knowledge on a variety of topics. Hope you can join us. That's it for now. See you all Monday. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.